Okay, so just a little quick preamble, kind of full disclosure on my part, which just shows like how old school and reactionary I am. But I think there's an important point here. When Steve Smith asked me to moderate this panel, my first question was like, why are we talking about CTV at a publishing conference? Why aren't we doing that at our TV, which is now TV video conference? And I think there's a lot of conflation in this industry, and it's something I have a hard time keeping up with, which is, you know, and the point I think that really solidified it for me was yesterday when I was interviewing Deb Brett from Condé Nast, and she said, we're on 120 platforms. So I think all these terms for platforms and what is content, what are media business models, they're all in the eye of the beholder. And a long time ago, I told both these guys I'd set this up with this anecdote. You know, for years, depending on the media segment I'm covering, I often look at it as blind men describing an elephant. The guy who touches the tail thinks it's a snake. The guy who touches the leg thinks it's a tree trunk, et cetera. And I think in our industry, you know, if you're a publisher, you look at streaming and video on demand and CTV as opportunities. And if you're a broadcaster, you do too. And so that's why I think this is a great panel to have. Originally, we had Aaliyah from Reverie, who is probably the purest play example of a, you know, native CTV platform. I'm sorry she couldn't be here, but I'm going to incorporate some of her prep notes. So on this note, we heard Michael B. give the a great presentation on how you know, the soul has evolved with all this amazing snackable content through social, YouTube, and now into VOD and CTV. I think it'd be a good opportunity to flip it to the other side of the media spectrum and ask Mike Len, who is Director of Transformation for the Graham Media Group, which is, I mean, you have some awesome digital assets, but you're a traditional broadcaster for the most part. So I want you both, starting with you, ask, how many platforms are you on? And how does that fit into the thesis we have here, which is, what is the strategy for you?
Yeah, I would say we're not on 120 platforms, and then there's a level of what defines a platform. And so you've got the social platforms, obviously. We've been on there since day one, sometimes giving away our content, sometimes engaging the community on them. We have apps on the traditional Rokus, Samsungs, Fire TVs, those areas, those are platforms. And then obviously our website runs on a lot of different platforms. I thought it was funny when you mentioned TV as a platform. We are on TV too, as we can send a signal over the air. You get it with a cheap antenna sometimes, if all goes well. So we're on the TV platform as well.
For us, before we started our streaming endeavor, we were on about 30 different social platforms or video platforms digitally. And since we've started moving to streaming, our content's broadcast at least around in 50 different iterations across various platforms. So I would probably say in the range of like 30 to 45.
Okay. That's a lot. So officially, Michael N., because you're on this panel, you're now a publisher, by the way, not just a broadcaster. But so you set up my personal anecdote, which is over the last year, I've been trying to throttle back and cut the cord, and you know, I write about it sometimes in my columns. And I was pulling the last plug now by getting off a virtual MVPD, YouTube TV. I've kind of winnowed down to Sling, but I'm going to pull a plug on that this week. And I want to go pure streaming and this other thing called over the air. So I did try and set up a digital over the air antenna, and I thought this would be awesome. I'd be able to get all my local broadcast channels, and now, like, I don't need those, you know, cable distributed ones. But I couldn't. I got one public TV station locally in Connecticut, and as Michael said, I need to play around. The fact that there's a lot of friction getting free over-the-air TV is just crazy for me. But the other point was I'm on a Roku set, and it immediately imported hundreds of fast channels. And now I have to go through and remove the ones I don't want, because there's a lot I don't. I do want the soul. I do want Graham. But I think it was an instructive lesson for me, like how confused confusing this marketplace has gotten for consumers. And never mind that people in the industry don't even understand the differences between VOD, FAST. I mean, the fact that we're talking about this like FAST is new, for you over-the-air television was, ad-supported television, was the original model. So it's ironic, we've reinvented contextual targeting based on the earlier presentation. So I think what I'm trying to understand, and I think the audience wants to do, is what is the role, the strategic role of this in your play? And for you, Michael, is it defensive in the sense that you're a broadcaster who might have consumers like me who can't access you unless we get it through CTV, or is it an opportunity, and how are you going to leverage that?
I mean, the government gives us spectrum to be able to serve our communities, and so the fact that you're having problems doing that, it really speaks to the fact that we need to make sure that everyone knows both how to, and then our signals are strong enough that you're able to get that. So that's a problem, and that is something that we need to address, and we need to teach our viewers how to get free over-the-air signals again. For a long time, we'd really been leaning into the cable and MVPD marketplaces, and I think it's time for us to make sure we're thinking about those platforms that the government has given to us and has given us license to use. But really, with the rise of digital, what we've seen, and what I think is really amazing is, especially during COVID, everyone learned how to connect their television to the internet. And all these platforms came into existence, and they're competing with traditional TV, with traditional cable. And I think that's a really good thing for content. I think that's a really good thing for the audience. I think that it's a really bad thing for traditional media that has always had really high bars to clear for somebody to come in and compete with us on the big screen television. So for us, we very much need to meet these users where they're at. We need to make sure our brands remain relevant. And quite frankly, with all these competitors, the way that we tell stories and report the news and reflect our local community has really changed as well. People expect something different than breaking news at 5 o'clock. And so we really need to, we're really leaning into changing the storytelling and doing a better job of reflecting what our communities want. And they're clearly showing that to us by looking at all these competitors now on the television station. So it's important.
So specifically, obviously you're passing through your full-fledged stations, but you're creating new digital-only channels?
Yeah, so we're passing through our full-fledged stations. We're staying away from the fast platforms right now just because the business doesn't quite work. But the other thing that we're really working on is we don't actually have the rights to rebroadcast NBC and the network content, so we're producing more content to run, so that way when you're watching our channel streaming, you can watch that 24/7 just like you would a regular TV station, and you feel like you're getting good original content. It's not just replays and that kind of thing. So we're investing in that. And then with the fast channels, we see that coming in. And so we're trying to find content and models, and it's really cool hearing what you talked about earlier, trying to find ways that we can build content that can be supported through fast and through the business model that is a rev share, because we're not used to rev shares on our linear streams on video. That's not something we do a lot of. And so we have to figure that out. So we're trying to produce content that could be distributed on those and hoping to have that by the end of the year.
So for you, it's been all opportunity, because you're indifferent to the way you get to the consumer as long as you can get to the consumer. The opportunity with CTV is for you to package a lot of short-form content into longer-form experiences. So I think what I want to ask both of you is, like, there's a lot of complexity in striking all these deals. You mentioned the rev share models, there's negotiations, there's licensing issues. You talked about the fact that you can't pass through the network content. That's messed up. I mean, this should be access to me as a consumer, but I can't
Did you
get
tell
it.
the networks that?
Yeah. But the point is, I think Deborah said that yesterday, which is there's a lot of complexity. That's what she's worked on for 4 years, to unify all of those Condé Nast brands across all these different platforms. It's taken them 4 years to get to this point. What is going to be the next disruptive thing? We call it FAST now. We love acronyms in this business. There'll be a new one. I'm guaranteeing Media Plus will publish one within the next week or days. What do you worry about in terms of the complexity?
From our perspective, I think it would just be the volume of saturation and competition. If you look at some of the FAST platforms or the streaming platforms, they're very decisive about the kind of metrics they expect to see. So you have to continue performing, and there's, like us, so much volume coming onto these platforms, so you have to stay competitive and find new ways to get yourself promoted, even once you get in the door. But we feel like we cracked the code on social. We know how to break through the noise of it, and a lot of the same lessons, like I said, are applicable to the streaming space. So we feel like our content can compete against the traditional forms of media.
There are so many platforms, fast platforms right now. It is, in my mind, that has to consolidate as the market matures. And my biggest fear is that the rev share model continues to allow brands to lose control of their monetization techniques, to lose control of what they know about their audiences. Jonathan, we know more about our audience on our websites than anyone else, and we know that. That's not true with these fast platforms right now. We don't get those analytics. We don't get next day analytics is as best as we get. We have better analytics through Nielsen right now, which no one says that that's the great thing.
Who's that, Nielsen?
Yeah, exactly. And so really these fast platforms, their control of that data and that rev share model, we lose as brands a lot of control in that current model. And so as they consolidate and as there is a clear winner, be it Roku or whatever else, in my mind, the biggest threat is that they continue to control that revenue and that model. That's my biggest fear. And then also control the discovery. That's a huge deal to me.
I mean, back in the early days, pre-internet, John Malone, the owner, chairman of TCI, biggest cable outfit at that time, coined the phrase the 500-channel universe. And it was almost like a joke that repeated itself. Well, we literally, we're beyond that now. I mean, if you think of the creator universe, it's a 1-million-channel universe. And now Roku has the Creator Hub. So you're facing infinite competition. You mentioned that there were some free ad promotional tools that you can use on some of the platforms. But do you need to budget more for, I mean, you have discoverable content, but both of you, is this a new marketing expenditure?
I don't think so. I think there are other solutions. One area we've been exploring is licensing content from other creators, smaller creators, to use our tools, use our experiences, and use our processes to help get them in front of places they wouldn't have been able to afford on their own. And we're not alone in doing that. There's a lot of people doing that on streaming, also on YouTube these days. So it's, I think, to your point, there's a lot of consolidation happening, not just at the platform level, but also at the brand level, and building, I think, familiar families of IP that can live together and sort of compete together rather than by themselves, because it's just too much, as you said.
That, on a local level, that always scares me, because a lot of times, brands are looked at as national, and their penetration as a national scale rather than at a local scale. And so how do you bound a bunch of IP together as 7 local TV markets? We create some national brands, but it's not going to have the same impact as 14 billion views. That's amazing. But that is one of the things that we're really struggling with. But we do have strong brands in each of our markets, and so we're really hoping to hold on to those as long as we can, and hopefully get more people on OTA and other platforms that we have a little control over.
I mean, at one time, on-air promotion was the biggest media spend for networks and stations in the whole marketplace. I mean, it way surpassed paid media. But as your distribution goes down, I think we're almost at a 50% penetration of linear TV households. It's going to go south soon. How are you going to stand out? How are you going to get discovered? How are you going to?
For us, it's our local communities. I mean, I think we still are valued. We're still trusted going into a big election year again. People turned to us during COVID. People turned to us in 2020 and January 6th, and we are still a trusted brand, and we value that, and we want to reinforce that. We want to make sure we're telling the stories of our communities and lifting ourselves up. That's a big piece of that change in storytelling that we're working on. we're trying to work with local brands and brands that want to be relevant inside of our local communities and supporting them. You know, that's really the way that we're leaning into that. I think the audience model is a really interesting one because I think a lot of people, when they go out and buy advertising, they think local is geo-targeted ads. And I think one of the positions that I very much would love to bring back to the table is local actually is people who are engaging contextually in local content and local topics and local dialogues. I think that's a little bit different than just geo-targeting people as they're in a community that they're getting there. So really trying to work on that at an audience level as well. And it's a tough conversation right now in the buyer space. And we're you know, it's one that we're working toward.
All right, well, let's move into the other side of advertising, the ones that give you money. So a while back, Graham was part of a group of stations led by Scripps, I think, to form a political fast, I think basically an ad network across local broadcast stations. Political's still your cash cow. I mean, it's a huge source of revenues, but it's got to migrate to these platforms too. Is that the future? Is it about local, meaningful broadcast content pooling together to create global or national networks?
I don't know if I know the answer. I think more and more agencies are approaching us and asking us to help them figure out the answers. The Scripps Political Consortium led by those guys, I thought it was pretty successful in 2022. They did a great job marketing local groups, and then I think technology just wasn't quite there, at least not on the Graham side, to really take full advantage of that as well as we should have. But I think that coming into the marketplace now, the pipes are now set up where we can have we can have political come in through programmatic, we can have political come in through national agencies, we can have political come through new consortiums as well. So that is really important for us, and then we can also make sure that we're able to take buys and move media around as best as possible, because that's what happens during a political season is media gets bumped around, and so having a digital platform, having this audience scale again allows us to move things around and take better advantage and better serve political or traditional clients.
Well, as complex and stifling as a million-channel universe is for consumers, how is that working for media buyers and brand people that you're pitching? I remember the days when I go to media departments and you'd see the reps standing in the waiting room to queue up. You can't have a million of them standing there. How are you breaking through with the ad community, both of you?
You want to start?
Sure. We predominantly focus on programmatic that runs on these platforms or the ad fills that are happening on our behalf. Like, we run all of our fast channels through Amagi. They satisfy our ads on our behalf. We do run some limited brand partnerships with brands that make a lot of sense for our programming, like Crayola or Mattel, who fit very natively into 5 Minute Crafts. Branded content, yeah. But even that, it's not something we're focused on because we're super laser focused on the editorial pipeline and not doing things to disrupt that. So it has to make a lot of sense.
I would say programmatic has kind of solved the too many media buyers problem for us, but we very much want to get back into the space where we're direct selling this content more, and we're developing sophisticated sellers to try to make sure that we're meeting the brands where they want to be. We know brands can buy audience at scale, and they can do that, and then they can run on any number of screensavers or apps or platforms. But if they want a local news experience, we really hope that they can come to us and find us again, and hopefully in the near future be looking at us every time they have a local spend that will go there. And it's a training thing. It's definitely a disrupted space right now, and we want to figure that out for sure. But we've got the audience. We know people are in there watching these ads. We know that they're very likely to convert on a lot of those ads when they're watching our local news content. We know that we're trusted. I'm going to keep saying that. We really value that trust that users put on us as publishers. And so we're really hoping all of that, speeds us along to find more buyers and connect the dots as quickly as possible.
So you used the word publishers, that's good. You
I
like-
consider myself
okay.
a publisher, yeah.
Good. So I do too. So earlier this year, I was at NBC Universal's Developers Conference, and they unveiled their first, they claim it was the first, self-serve interface from a major broadcast company like that. I mean, I think initially it's going to be for their CTV inventory, but you know, programmatic is a great equalizer. But the other flip side is it opens up the opportunity for them to reach the long tail and all that good business that's going into Meta and Amazon and you know Google. So is that an opportunity you're looking at now?
I mean, we definitely have connected up the pipes for programmatic, and the technology is actually really fascinating there in terms of you know, what does live linear television look like with programmatic, where you've got, you know, massive number of requests happening simultaneously, and you're trying to grab as much metadata as possible in an environment that doesn't necessarily have the greatest audience data. But we're seeing a ton of money in going through those pipes right now. Self-service is a really fascinating platform, and one that very much keeping a very close eye on and trying to find. We have local sellers. We have quite a few of them in each of our markets, obviously, and very much think of them as solutions-oriented partners for people who want to advertise and have their brand exposed. And so hopefully they can really start bringing in more of this CTV space as a solution, just like they did for television for decades and decades.
I think what I meant was, what is the broader upside for a local broadcaster? So, you know, the old New Yorker cartoon, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. They don't know you're a local station. I think in Michael B's presentation, he had that one slide that international is a great entry point. Deb, in her presentation yesterday, said they're in, I think, dozens of countries now. You could be global.
We could. And we have brands. We have a Solutionaries brand, which is very much trying to solve, you know, sometimes national, sometimes local problems. But then we try to bring it into the local community. I think that our value to our audience is local and is our communities. We know our communities. We answer questions for our communities, and then we also connect with brands that are in those communities that don't necessarily, or that can't necessarily get their message out in a national world all the time. It's a tough spot, and the platforms, I don't think, take local into account very often, and that's a tough thing for us. And so that's something that I'm going to stand on my stage right now and say, if you're a platform, please think of local, please think of proximity. Google News finally started putting local brands on there. It was amazing for them. They got more engagement. It was great. And I think people care about their local communities. If COVID told us anything, and if this gathering of humans, community means a lot.
Yeah. I mean, when I did that thing and got the fast broadcast channels passed through from Roku, about 50 of them are local TV stations. So question is, why do I care about KTLA versus WABC in New York? Well, maybe the production values are better. Maybe I care about Hollywood. I don't know, but there's an opportunity there, I think, to leverage the localism of those communities in some broader marketplace.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, are there any questions from the audience? Okay, so what is the thing that keeps you up at night? It seems like you're pretty happy and content with everything, but is there anything?
We're still learning a lot. I mean, we've only started this endeavor a year and change ago. We only launched our first fast channels 4 months ago. So and I think for the fast channels, there's still a lot of room for growth. There's not like a business model that we're excited about yet, but we see the potential. But that's how we've sort of treated a lot of social platforms that haven't properly monetized yet. You kind of have to go in there to the Wild West, grab your land, and hold your ground for as long as you can. So that's what we're focused on doing right now, but it can be tough. Fast channels are expensive to run.
So it's nice to have, but it's not vital to your strategic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. For you, maybe a little more so?
I think fast channels are a great new form of medium, and clearly people are really interested in them. It doesn't match our business model 100% right now, and we have to figure that out. You know, if we have to work, you know, where we're dealing with a revenue share in the future, it just changes how we gather news and that kind of thing. And I think, you know, again, focusing on our communities, you know, it is really important that we maintain those brands in the community. What keeps me awake at night is the brand not meaning anything, and that it could disappear or people not know of our local brands, and no one would care. I feel like right now people would be up in arms if a brand like ours just disappeared.
I'm curious, why aren't you not leveraging the Graham Media brand?
Again, focusing on that local community I mean, these television stations have been, you know, in Detroit for almost 100 years, have been around for a long time. They're well established. They mean a lot to people. We go, you know, when you go to a Graham market, you talk about those brands. We try to be the best. We try to represent those voices. So we really lean on those local brands.
I guess what I meant is we just saw a great presentation from Meredith. We saw Arena's, you know, point yesterday. I think The Soul is an aggregation play. Why wouldn't you roll it all up into some, you know, super brand that's Graham Media that could play globally or nationally? Is it just your culture that's your DNA?
I think it's a good question. I wouldn't preclude it from happening in the future, but right now we definitely think that people seek out the TV stations rather than Graham Media Group. Maybe it's worth. I mean, you can see it with Scripps. They have their news product. That's really great. I mean, I love seeing things that are coming out like The Soul. But right now we believe in our local brands, so that's what we're leaning into for sure.
I have a question for Michael B. Are you seeing, I know that it's only 4 months in, but are you seeing particular behaviors, viewing behaviors emerge on the fast channels that are either surprising you, that you're taking note of, different kinds of behaviors and usage patterns that we should know about in terms of how people are actually using and viewing these channels?
I think the thing that surprised me the most was how Kids and Family performs just as well in streaming as it does on YouTube. So there's definitely a mad dash to grab up and associate yourself or find content to put on your channels. So Kids and Family is a huge growth area that we see. It's our #1 performing channel. We have a number of animated brands that we run, and they're crushing it.
How about length of viewing? I mean, are they, you know, you've got a discrete channel there, a little different from, although you do have a YouTube channel and other social media channels, I think the viewing experience is a little different here. I mean, in terms of longevity, are people just putting it on and letting it run for an hour, or are you seeing any particular usage in that way?
Yeah, the way that fast channels have often been described is lean back viewing. It's not as engaged as you might find on YouTube, where you're going to a channel to find something. But that could shift over time, but that's what we're seeing today.
So if I could, question in the front here.
Yeah, hang on.
As the mother of a 5-year-old boy,
Who you are?
and Medea. So is your target audience like 5, 6, 7-year-old kids?
Well, I should clarify. We have like dozens of brands that we run.
Yeah.
5 Minute Crafts is not designed for kids. It's
Yeah.
designed for family consumption, but it does run on Kids and Family platforms like Sensical, which is run by Common Sense Media, like Cadoodle, because it's engaging and I think it's creative and it teaches kids how to use their imagination to solve problems. So yeah, it works for kids, but it's not intended for kids.
So what's your perspective on how do you, like, at some point you might have to pivot into like a direct, you know, own your own like advertising strategy rather than just rely on those big, you know, like the YouTubes, anything could change in a minute. What are your thoughts on like?
Maybe someday. I mean, I came from BuzzFeed and I was on
Right.
the brand team, so I'm very familiar with that world and I could see how we could crush it there if we were so inclined. But for now, it makes more sense for us to follow the scale, follow the engagement that comes from that scale. And it's supported us pretty well so far today, but down the line, we have great partnerships with partners like Crayola where we're helping them figure out branded content. It's not that we're not doing it, it's just not a huge emphasis of our business yet.
Well, I think if I could wrap up what the resolve would be for your thesis, Steve, it's that streaming is not a strategy, it's part of a strategy, and there's a lot of tactics that different companies are playing here, if I heard you right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michaels, Joe, thanks so much. We're gonna